Welcome to Lighten Up, a show about bringing more love, light, and joy into your life, and archived on the Lighten Up program page. Please join us in the chat room by clicking on the chat room icon located on the left-hand side of our menu bar. Now the host of Lighten Up, Isabel Merians.
Lighten Up with Isabel, your good news show, bringing you happiness, joy, love, and light into your life. Today we are very blessed. We have a wonderful, wonderful guest, Ronald Bern, who has written 8 books, is a wonderful raconteur, an avid outdoorsman, and has run many companies. Quite a resume. Welcome, Ron. Thank you so much for being with us today.
And thank you for having me here.
Yeah, I know that your book, your first novel, The Legacy, was considered by the Detroit Free Press the finest book to come out of the South in the 1970s. I'd really like to ask you a little bit about that book and how you came to write it.
Well, basically, The Legacy is a kind of a thinly veiled account of how in fact, my family grew up in a small southern town in the 30s and 40s. The actual writing of the book took years and years and years because I had so many other responsibilities that there was no time in my day to write. So I wrote the entire novel with a felt-tip pen on a legal pad, balanced on my knees on a commuter train between New Brunswick, New Jersey, and New York, because those 2 little chunks of time were the only time I had in my day.
Well, that's really pretty remarkable. Well, I remember you telling me that during the 70s you were extremely busy. You were bringing up a family, you were coaching Little League, you were running a company. I mean, I think this is really quite a remarkable thing that you were able to do it. So you had to have a really passion about this project that drove you forward.
I did. It was a story I always wanted to tell.
Uh-huh.
And, somebody once said, if you want something done, ask a busy man to do it. And, you find time to do the things you really want to do in life.
Right.
I really wanted to tell that story. And it took me 7 years and lots and lots and lots of yellow legal pads. But finally it got done.
Well, I remember you went all around the country speaking about the book. You were on a speaking tour for quite a while with it.
Yeah, it turned out that I was probably a better speaker than I was a writer.
Oh, no.
Because the speaking tour for the book lasted for 2 years.
Wow,
and
2 years?
It literally took me from one end of the country to the other.
Well, is that how you came to be a guest on the Barry Farber show so often?
Exactly.
Because I remember that. I remember that, you telling me that.
Barry Farber, who was the wonderful, wonderful late-night radio guy in New York City, had grown up in a southern town himself, got hold of The Legacy, and really liked it and related to it.
Uh-huh.
And I met him, and then I became his favorite guest. And as a matter of fact, when he left radio to run for mayor of New York on the conservative ticket, I was his nominee to take over the show.
Wow, that's quite a compliment. And I remember something about you didn't do that, I know.
No, as a matter of fact, the station had other ideas.
I didn't know if it was that or if it was not enough money. I wasn't sure how that
I might well have considered it, but the station thought otherwise.
Okay. Well, Ron, I had promised my viewers that at each program I would tell one funny story. So I wondered if today you would do that for me, because I know you've got a lot of stories to tell.
Well, I'd be happy to. And the story I have, not to be indelicate, but it's about a visit I made to an old friend whom I hadn't seen in several years. And as we were chatting, his old Weimaraner, those big, tall, gray, short-haired dogs,
right,
came into the room, and I beheld, the dog's name was Smokey, and I beheld to my astonishment, and again, not to be indelicate, but Smokey's scrotum had stretched to the point where it was literally brushing the ground with each step he took.
Oh, my.
And I said to Harold, isn't there anything you can do? And he said, yes, we are. We're having Smokey fitted for high-heeled shoes.
That's very funny. That's very funny. That's very funny. Well, as part of our program each week, I like to do a little review. Since our program is about bringing more love and light and joy into your life, I'd like to review some of the ways that I think are important. Last week I made my viewers a promise that if they would just take out 2 minutes of their day in the morning or in the evening and simply write down the things that they were grateful for, it would set them up for a much happier day. I don't know how many people actually did that, but I hope some did. Gratitude is a very, very wonderful thing because most of us come to take so much for granted. And as I have pointed out, that if you're viewing this show, you have your vision, and that's a blessing. If you're listening, you have your hearing, and that's a blessing. If you can turn on your faucet and get clean water, that's a blessing. All of these things are blessings that we sort of take for granted. But when you stop and think about it, if you have someone that you love in your life or that loves you, that's a blessing. So there are many, many blessings that people have come to just simply gloss over. And instead of being focused on what is, they're focused on what isn't. And that was my promise. I hope some people did that actually. A second thing that I talked about is helping others. When you help others, you literally help yourself as well. Because not only do you feel a sense of satisfaction, but you are helping another human being or an animal or whatever you're helping. It gives you a sense of joy. Another thing that I suggest is bringing more humor into your life. And you certainly know how to do that. You're quite wonderful in that way. A third thing is, or fourth thing really, is about playing more. I think grown-ups don't play enough. And actually, I talk about the ABCs of living a more joyous life. And since today is the third broadcast, our letter for today is C. And for me, C is choose a life with purpose, make a difference. That is a very important thing. I'm also adding a fifth thing, which is healing. Because obviously, in order to bring joy and light and love into our life, we need to be healthy. Now, most people are aware of health because it's constantly in the news. And we're constantly told about reducing stress and eating properly and exercising and all of these things. But healing, there are so many aspects to it that two of my very favorites are humor, bringing more humor into your life, and being aware of the natural world, getting outdoors and being in the natural world. And since, Ronald, you sort of incorporate both of those into your life, you're my prime example for that. Of course, the earth is the mother of us all. The earth provides us with everything we need, and it's said that rivers are her veins and the wind is her breath. And we should be more mindful of taking better care of the earth. When, when did your love affair with the outdoors begin?
It actually began when I was quite small, 6 or 7 years old, and started to fish and tramp the outdoors with my dad, who was a remarkable, extraordinary man, who was great fun, who loved the outdoors, who was vastly interested in animals. And, I inherited all of that and have lived my whole life that way.
You spend a great deal of time out of doors, I know that. I'm told that you have a great fondness for rivers, and so I'd really like you to address that a bit.
Well, I really do. I love the wildness of them and the mystery of them and their purling depths. I always wanted to write a little bit about rivers, and when I wrote my most recent novel, there's a paragraph in here that's about rivers that if I could, I'd sort of like to read.
My great pleasure.
Just to set it up, the title character in the book is drifting down a wildly flooding river, cut almost to death after a terrible fight, and probably dying. He's been raised half wild his whole lifetime, and he spent a great deal of time on this particular Saluda River. And this is the paragraph. Thinking about the river eased him a little. He had always thought of it as his own, always felt its rhythms and its transformations in the rising and falling of his own spirit, although he had no words to explain it. He loved the quiet of the river of a summer's evening and its dark, leaf-studded translucence in the fall. He appreciated the bounty of it, the catfish and bass and big yellow carp it yielded, the turtles and hornet heads, the ducks he jump shot in late fall, the muskrats he trapped in winter. He loved the river's purling song when it was quiet and the power of its roar when its dander was up. There was no mood of the river, no aspect, no phase he didn't appreciate. When he finally quit school at 13, he fashioned his first clumsy boat out of scrap lumber and began spending days and nights on the river, fishing, drifting, and learning most of what he knew about life that was gentle and fine.
Oh, that's very beautiful. That's very beautiful. Now, let me ask you this. I mean, I know you've spent so much time on rivers yourself, but this novel, this Mule Maddox, is about a young man who, after a dramatic fight, is trying to escape. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what gave you the impetus to write this particular novel? Well, I know that's a rather complex question.
No, it's not. It's a wonderful question. And this will be a sort of a strange answer. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, a man came into my father's place of business, an old man dressed in what looked like Civil War clothes with a celluloid collar and a black string tie and a big Panama hat.
Wow.
And when he walked through the door, 3 men who were in the room ran out.
Really?
They were terrified of this old man.
Wow.
He was courtly to a fault. He was as gentlemanly as anybody I ever met in my life. And yet it turned out that he and his brothers had killed 11 men.
Oh, my goodness.
I started wondering, what on earth, what factors could possibly shape such a contradictory personality? Mm-hmm. It turned out for him it was the Civil War and Reconstruction that he had lived through.
He had lived through the Civil War.
He had been a child during the Civil War and almost died, almost starved to death, and had somehow managed to live through that experience and grow to be an old man.
Wow.
But with no Civil War, how would you shape a character like that? And I literally pondered that question for more than 60 years. Wow. And then one day I finally decided that it could be that a boy could be raised entirely without affection, without support, without any kindness whatsoever, that he could be raised in the bosom of a family that hated him from the time he was born.
Wow. And
who ultimately half raised himself. And that is my character, Rafe Maddox, and that's how I came to write this book. When that eureka moment came, mm-hmm. and I realized that there was a way to do that, to shape that character. Right. And in the beginning of the book, he kills 2 people in a knife fight.
Right, defending
a young woman.
Right.
But he himself is an extremely gentle and decent character. And that's Mule Maddox.
That's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Well, now tell me, I know you spend a great deal of time out of doors. Do you happen to live in a particularly wild area?
I don't, and it's a wonderful point. Thoreau said, we need the tonic of wildness, and I've always felt that myself. And the truth of the matter is, everybody within the sound of my voice lives contiguous to some kind of nature.
Right.
But you just have to seek it out.
Right.
You just have to go and find it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much worth the journey.
Wow. It's fascinating.
But I live in a well-developed central New Jersey township.
Really?
But I'm within 35 or 40 minutes of 5 of the great lakes in the state of New Jersey. I'm less than an hour from the Delaware River. I'm less than 20 minutes from the Raritan River. I mean, the wilderness is all around me. I'm just willing to take the trouble to go and seek it out.
Let me ask you this, Ronald. Have you ever felt frightened when you were in the woods? Have you ever been scared by a bear or a snake or anything like that was really frightening for you?
Well, I'm 78 years old.
Really?
And I had an experience 70 years ago that was really quite scary.
What was that?
I was fishing with my father and 2 other men at a place called Buzzard's Roost, a lake, and we were cane pole fishing for big dinner plate sized crappie. And
now, what is the crappie? Is that one of those flat fish?
It's called a papermouth bass. It's a bigger version, basically, of a sunfish.
Okay.
It's like a cross between a sunfish and a bass, almost.
Okay.
And I went back up to the car to get a drink of water.
And how old were you then?
I was 8.
Okay.
Went up to the car to get a drink of water, but I never found the car.
Oops.
And then I never found the lake.
Oops.
And I was lost in literally hundreds of thousands of acres of woods.
How terrifying.
So I started walking. And I knew I was looking for something, but I didn't know what I was looking for because I was 8 years old.
Well, did you know about moss supposedly?
No, I didn't know any of that
stuff.
stuff.
Know any of that stuff.
And even if I had known, what good would it have done me to know where north was?
Yeah, that's true.
But I walked until I found a game trail.
And I thought, how did you recognize it?
Well, it's
just a little
it's just a indentation that you see in the leaves and grass, where game use habitually. Right. And I followed that game trail till I came to a path. Mm-hmm. And I followed that path till I came to a dirt road, and the dirt road ultimately led me to a tar and gravel road. And I knew I was going to be fine. I was now worried about my dad because I knew he would be absolutely frantic.
Sure.
I walked up this tar and gravel road till I came to a filling station, and there were 4 men in there, and I explained them my dilemma, and they were standing around me outside the filling station when I looked over the hill, and there was a green 1940 Ford. It was my dad. And I've never been so happy to see a sight. But that's the last time I've ever been afraid in the woods.
Well, but being afraid that time never deterred you from going right back.
Of course not.
No.
Absolutely not.
And wasn't there some wild story you told me once, and I think when we first spoke, about going with your father fishing and the car got stuck? That's a wild story. Maybe if you don't mind telling it. I don't know if it's a funny story. It's kind of wild.
Just to cut the story short, my dad had managed, my dad was great at everything except driving a car. So my dad had managed to drive the front end of our 1949 Chevrolet off in a very, very deep ditch, down at the end of a dirt road in impenetrable woods. And the car would almost, but not quite, pull itself out.
Right.
So I said to my father, I said, let me get a grip underneath the running board and see if I can pick it up that last inch. Mm-hmm. So I said, for God's sakes, don't let your foot slip off the clutch. He said, of course not. So the car got all the way up as far as it could possibly go, and my father's foot slipped off the clutch.
Oh, my God.
And the car fell on my shin.
Ooh.
The sharp edge of the door fell on my shin.
Oh, my God.
So I was rolling around in the dirt holding my shin. Oh. And my father, who was one of the funniest men I've ever met in my life, got out of the car and stood over me surveying the scene, and then he uttered these deathless words. He said, you know, my boy, he said, I believe you inherited a flair for the dramatic from your mother's side of the family. Well, as if this weren't bad enough, to my horror, a mud-caked old pickup truck materialized out of the woods with 4 characters right out of Deliverance.
Oh, my God.
Gaunt, huge, tobacco-stained.
Rough.
And they got out of the truck, and one of them said, what's the matter with that old boy there? And my dad said, oh, he said, he's got a little bump on his leg, he'll be fine. So he said, what y'all doing down here? And my dad said, well, we were going fishing down here in the Tugelo River. And then the guy said these really chilling words. He said, "River's the other way." And I knew it was the other way. So, they were obviously bootleggers, and they had obviously decided that we were down there to find their still.
Oh, my God.
Which is very dangerous.
Of course.
So, and then the guy said, "Oh, I don't see no poles." So my dad said, "Well, I'll show you." And he opened the trunk, and there were, fishing tackle and bait and everything.
Oh, so they knew you were legit.
Yeah, they knew.
You were off the hook.
And Dad was never afraid of anything in his life, and he wasn't afraid of these four characters, but I kind of was. They said, "We're going to get you out of here, but we don't ever want to see you down here again." And they went over and they didn't even bother to start the car. They just picked it up and put it on the road.
Well, there were four of them.
Four of them, but with such incredible strength. I was very happy to drag myself back in the car.
Well, they talk a lot about bonding when people are out in nature. And, of course, nature, the outdoors, is so glorious and beautiful and majestic. And as a matter of fact, I remember once going canoeing through the mangrove swamps off Sanibel Island and thinking that this was the closest to a temple that I had ever been into. It was just such a profound sense of beauty and peace and oneness with nature, and I remember that very, very well. And I'm sure there's certain places that stand out in your mind as being special for you.
Absolutely. Well, Frank Lloyd Wright, the great architect, once said, "I believe in God, only I spell it nature." And that always resounded with me. But, you hear about bonding in the outdoors, and you always think of male bonding.
Male bonding.
And certainly my three great fishing partners in life. First was my dad, then Manny Lefglass, my co-author for 3 fishing books, and my great friend that I've spent thousands of hours fishing with, and then Bob Finley, my oldest and closest friend, with whom I spend a week every year on a gorgeous, glorious lake in southern Ontario, fishing and joking and
having fun,
and just generally having fun. But it's not all male bonding.
No, I'm sure.
I remember one time I really consciously was looking for a way to bond with my beautiful, beautiful little granddaughter, Lauren. Her older brother was a great athlete, and I had karate, we had baseball, we had soccer, we shared a lot of stuff, but I didn't have those things with Lauren. And then I thought about maybe taking her for a little nature walk. I found this beautiful patch of virgin woods, and we took a little walk, and I found this lovely little stream, and in the stream bed I found tracks where a raccoon had fed, and I showed her that. And I explained to her about raccoons' tactile feelings in their hands. And we went a bit further, and I found tracks of a doe and a fawn that I could show her. And I showed her with the thing you mentioned before about moss growing on the north side of a tree and how to find direction. And it was extraordinary. And we really bonded that day.
That's beautiful.
And she spent hundreds of hours with me in my boats, both in Florida and New Jersey, from that time to this. Of course, she's all grown up now. But that bond has lasted.
That's
and it all
wonderful.
started right on that pretty little stream.
That's wonderful. Well, each time I do a telecast, I always have good news flash. So I have a couple of good news flashes today. And one of them is that ice cream is good for you. I heard some scientists talking this morning, and they've determined that the calcium is good for your bones and your teeth, that ice cream reduces stress, excuse me, that the fat in ice cream helps your body absorb minerals and vitamins, and they recommend that you have at least 1 scoop of ice cream a day. So that's a good news flash. My other good news flash is I was very concerned. I have a beautiful friend who lives in Israel. Her name is Miriam Lamdan, and since the war, I hadn't been able to reach her. And last night she called me, and we had a wonderful talk, and it made me feel really happy, my heart happy that she's all right. Let me ask you this, Ronald. Do you have a very favorite spot in terms of the outdoors that, that is just like I felt that way about the mangrove swamps and also the redwood forest, the Muir Woods outside of San Francisco. Again, you have this sense of majesty and serenity and beauty. Do you have any special spots like that?
There are lakes in the northeastern United States that are so beautiful that when my fishing partner, Manny Luftglass, and I fish them, we speak in hushed tones because it's like being in a cathedral.
Right.
They're so beautiful.
Well, that was my feeling as well.
Round Valley Reservoir in central New Jersey is one of those. Merrill Creek Reservoir is another. The Delaware River, with all of its wonderful power, is a great favorite spot of mine, and I've spent countless hours on the Delaware. And, I mentioned before that I'm 78 years old,
right.
But when I push away from the dock at Bonita Bay in Florida in my boat and start threading my way through the mangroves, I feel like I'm 28 years old. 50 years just fall away.
I know. It's like a renewal.
Yeah, these are such wonderful places.
Right. Now, I talk about healing and the importance of healing. And one day I'm going to do a whole program just on healing. But do you sense the healing power of nature? Are there any specifics in terms of nature that you feel are healing?
Well, let me tell you two quick little stories. One is quite specific to healing. The other's maybe a little more existential.
Okay.
40 years ago, I was a deeply committed smoker. I smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day.
Wow.
And I went to a great hypnotist, and he told me that what he wanted me to do when I thought about not smoking was to think about the cleanest, most bracing place I could think of.
Pristine.
And I thought of the Bonefish Flats off of Islamorada, Florida, which are wonderful beyond words to tell. And I left his office thinking about Islamorada, and I never smoked another cigarette.
Is that so?
And that healed me in this degree. There is no way on earth that I could still be alive if I had not had that experience. And the other thing...
That's amazing. That's an amazing story. Well, now, did he make this suggestion to you while he was hypnotizing you?
Yes. And the other experience was just outside of Sedona,
Arizona.
Arizona, yeah. My wife and I hiked up to a vortex, a very famous vortex. And as you know, these vortices are electrical bands that run under the earth, and they are particular power spots in that grid.
Right.
And I've never believed over much in that kind of thing, but we hiked up to this spot, and when we got there, I felt this overwhelming sense of peacefulness.
Really?
It was literally something you could feel.
And is it a very, very high up? Is it much of a hike?
Not too terribly high, you know. But then to make the experience, even more meaningful, 2 coyotes came walking down the path and walked past us as if they were pet dogs.
Really?
And then as we started back down, 2 mule deer came up the path and walked past us in the same way as if we had been mule deer.
Wow.
Or as if we had been trees.
You were part of the natural world.
Most extraordinary experience.
That's so interesting. That is really fascinating. Do you have a lot of wildlife in your backyard? Do you get a lot of critters?
I do, and I do something you're not supposed to do. I feed them.
Oh, that's naughty.
I know.
They say you're not supposed to do that.
You're not supposed to do it, except for the fact that we have taken their habitat to the point where they almost can't make a living. So if I buy 200-300 pounds of shelled corn of a winter and help the deer get through, I somehow don't feel terribly guilty about it. And I have a pet raccoon who comes and visits me every night, and I have to take care of him a little bit.
Oh, you're very kind. I must tell you, we used to have a lot of raccoon where I live. And, today I heard on the radio that they are now dropping, this sounds crazy, they are dropping from planes some sort of birth control for raccoons. It smells like fish, but if the raccoons eat it, okay, not only is the birth control, but it will keep them from getting rabies. Well, so I thought that was a pretty interesting thing that the Fish and Wildlife agencies are doing. They're getting very creative.
Yeah, but most of the time when we fiddle around overmuch with nature, we get things out of balance, and that's never very good.
Well, you told me a wonderful story about the wild turkeys. I have loads of wild turkeys in my backyard for the first time.
Well, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you never saw a wild turkey.
I know, that's
and
my
now
point.
Everybody sees wild turkeys everywhere.
Right.
And that is all due originally to the efforts of one man who was tasked by the National Fish and Wildlife Commission to restock turkeys. And he did this amazing job of captive breeding and astonishing stocking and
that's remarkable because they're everywhere now.
From his efforts have come this profusion of wild turkeys, which are really beautiful and very intelligent birds.
But I hear they can also be very aggressive. Is that true?
I've never been attacked by a turkey.
Well, in our last program, our wonderful producer and director, Richard Quinn, made a statement that everybody today takes pictures, but photographers capture a moment. And I thought that was a wonderful line. And so I guess my question to you is, as a writer, what really sets you off on your path? What is the impetus or the inspiration to write a book? Now, I know you've done these books on fishing, and I know that where that came from, your great love of fishing. And maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that. But in terms of fiction, what inspires that? I mean, can you sum it up in a way that...
Well, fiction is telling a story.
Right.
You need first to have a story worth telling.
Right.
And you have to have a story that you feel passionate about.
Right.
And sometimes it's a matter of solving a puzzle. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, I mentioned about Mulmatics and how I puzzled over that all those years. Wow. That was the impetus for that story. Mm-hmm. The legacy was growing up in an odd way in a small southern town.
Right.
The history of our family, which was quite dramatic.
Right. So it lent itself naturally to telling the story.
As I said before, Dr. Havilah Babcock, my great friend and mentor, and great writer himself, used to say that to be a writer, you either had to have something to say or you had to say it well. Having something to say, I think, is where it all starts.
Right, right. Well, do you have any final thoughts that you could give our viewers in terms of basically the outdoors and getting acquainted and enjoying?
I do.
Good.
Nature is so much more than just a destination or a hobby, or a pastime. A little-known writer named Lorraine Anderson, and I jotted this down for myself because I wanted to get it right. She said, "Nature has been for me for as long as I can remember a source of solace, inspiration, adventure, and delight, a home, a teacher, a companion." And George Santayana once wrote that the earth has music for those who listen. And the gift I would like to leave everybody within the sound of my voice with is this: listen, enjoy it, avail yourself of nature. It's not very far away. If you live in a crowded downtown place, it's just on the outskirts of town. I'm astounded that the lakes that are within such an easy ride of New York City and Newark and Philadelphia aren't jammed with people, but they're not, because people don't avail themselves of these wonderful opportunities. Give yourself that gift. Give yourself the joy of nature. Give yourself the tonic of wildness. It very likely will extend your life.
Well, that's a beautiful thought. Thank you so much. And I think we're going to break.
Some people still don't believe that secondhand smoke is dangerous. This is Scott Bakula. Did you know that just being around someone who smokes can cause severe lung problems, heart disease, and cancer? But there is something you can do about it. Call for a free booklet from the Will Rogers Institute. It clearly explains the proven risks of secondhand smoke and the ways you can avoid exposure. Toll free 1-877-957-7575, because secondhand smoke is dangerous. Believe it.
Ronald Bern for sharing his thoughts with us today. It was a fun program, and I'm sure it brought all of you a lot of light and fun into your life. I hope you'll come back and be a guest for us again. And for me, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Lighten Up with Isabel at Rockland Radio, Rockland World Radio.
Until next time, remember to live a more joyous life. Lighten up.
It's not just radio, it's Rockland World Radio. RocklandWorldRadio.com